Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one involves a theory of personality that is getting more and more attention these days, at least in part because we're looking more and more to biology and genetics for an awful lot of our behavior. Although, I just want to point out that no one will dispute that the environment also plays a large role. But when you're talking about personality, generally people want to know, well, how much do genes influence personality? How much of our personality do we inherit versus how much do we develop on our own? It's the old nature versus nurture problem that psychology is always wrestling with. And so the way that researchers have looked at this is to look at twins. Now there's two basic types of twins. The first type is called identical twins, also known as monozygotic twins. And if you listen to my prenatal development lecture, that should give you an idea of what we're talking about. Mono means one, zygote is a fertilized egg. Identical twins come from the same fertilized egg that at some point in the first few days, usually after fertilization, divides. Turns into two fertilized eggs, essentially, that came from the same. Instead of the single egg dividing and dividing and dividing and forming into one person, you have now two essentially genetically identical fertilized eggs who divide and divide and divide and so forth. Identical twins or monozygotic twins are always of the same sex, and they have a tendency to look very much alike because they come from pretty much exactly the same genes. Now, I say pretty much exactly because apparently sometimes when that fertilized egg divides to become those two individuals, that each individual doesn't get exactly the same combination. When we're talking about how cells divide, things get a bit complicated, and sometimes things go wrong. But we're talking 99-point-something% identical. By the way, another way things can go wrong is sometimes that fertilized egg, when it separates into two individuals, does not separate entirely. And you wind up with two individuals that are still physically connected to one another at some point in their bodies. These are called conjoined twins. Sometimes they're called Siamese twins because the first best known example is a bad word, but the first best known conjoined twins were Chang and Eng Bunker, who came from Siam, which is now known as Thailand. They were very, very famous in the middle of the 19th century. They were joined by a band of tissue essentially joining their chests to one another. So this connection can range from very, very mild to the case where people can be really quite seriously conjoined, depending on how much the twins separated or did not separate. But at any rate, identical twins, monozygotic twins, come from the same fertilized egg. Fraternal twins, on the other hand, come from two eggs. So instead of ovulating one egg, a mother will ovulate two eggs. Both of those eggs get fertilized, and so you wind up with twins that only share half of their genes, just like any other siblings. Because they came from two different sperm, two different egg, they only share roughly half their genes. What they do share, however, is the prenatal environment. It's essentially exactly the same for those fraternal twins, which will become important in a minute. Now, in the past in the United States, when twins were put up for adoption, they were often separated. I'm not sure whether it was a case of spreading the wealth kind of thing or whether they simply didn't want to deposit two brand new babies in the same family. So you wound up with twins being raised in different homes, often in different parts of the country, sometimes in different countries, different environments. On the other hand, more recently, twins have always been placed together in the same home, in the same environment. So you can see the combinations here. If you want to see how much personality is due to environment, you can, for instance, look at identical twins, exact same genes, different environments. How are they similar? How do they differ? If you want to look at the role of genes, for instance, you could look at identical twins, again, raised separately. Again, how similar, how different? Fraternal twins. If they're raised in the exact same environment, then how similar are they? Similarities are probably due to the environment because they only share half their genes. Now, there's been a problem with this because, of course, not all twins are identical. It's not even a 50-50 split. Most twins are fraternal, particularly these days, where you can have twins and triplets and so on that are due to multiple ovulations because of fertility drugs, for instance, or because of in vitro fertilization, where more than one fertilized egg is usually deposited in the hope that they will implant. But researchers have managed to try to tease out how much of our personality is due to genes and how much is due to our environment. They've come up with half of your personality is due to your genes. So you inherit roughly half of your personality from your parents. Roughly 35% of your personality comes from your environment, comes from where you grow up. But of course, I'm hearing some of you think right now, what happened to the other 15%? Well, the other 15% are a combination of heredity and environment that can't be separated. It's sort of like conjoined twins. They're so intertwined, the heredity environment, and that last 15%, that you simply cannot tell which one basically is included, and perhaps in the proportions or whatever. And we're learning more these days, just to make it even more exciting. We're learning more these days that a person's environment can actually alter what genes are used, what genes are expressed. And sometimes we're finding that a parent's environment can affect their children. It's getting really complicated, and things that we thought we knew, we don't necessarily know anymore. And so I'm not going to talk much more about it on this, because otherwise it'll be out of date in about 15 minutes. But I do want to point out that there do appear to be some traits that are more inherited than others. And when you take a look at this list, you will probably notice that these traits that are more inherited than others, in many ways, are biological. Aggressiveness. Well, we've learned that aggressiveness can be inherited. We've learned that it can be a biological thing, the amount of steroids, testosterone, that sort of thing. Need for success. Well, that can also be sort of a biological thing. In the evolutionary past and still in the present, successful individuals, particularly successful males, since males generally compete for females, successful males tended to have more kids than non-successful males did. Okay? Because females would pick them. And so that's biological. Vulnerability to stress. Well, stress is physiological. So how much stress affects you physiologically, that would make sense it was inherited. Proneness to imagination. Well, how imaginative you are may also be related to how your brain is wired together, to what exactly is going on there. We found that some people, it seems that the configuration of their brain allows them to be more creative. Left-handed people, it appears, may be more creative than right-handed people. And we have a very good idea that a lot of left-handed people have brains that are arranged slightly differently than right-handed people. Happiness. Well, we're learning that if you want to make someone happy in sort of a biological way, increase the amount of serotonin in their brain. Maybe happy people just simply have more serotonin. So all of these things that are inherited can be explained biologically, and it may indeed be part of why our personality is more highly inherited. But you can't rule out the environment. And as we're learning more and more, like I mentioned, the environment may be playing a role actually in our heredity, just to make things even more complicated.